Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Boogie Board Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Jordan Benjamin, who is the founder of MyCoreOS and is joining us from Vail, Colorado, I believe, today. Jordan, how are you?
I'm doing great. First big snow of the season is supposed to be coming tonight and tomorrow. So we're excited up here in the mountains.
Does that put you in skis right away?
Uh, Not that hardcore, although I did see some tracks down one of the mountains the other day. I'll probably give it a couple weeks so I don't get eaten by any of the sharks that are a little different for your boogie boarding theme. Mine, those are rocks coming out of the ground for us skiers that I don't really like to deal with to start the season.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And you're from the area?
Yeah, from the Front Range, Colorado, like right outside of Boulder area, born and raised, and then spent 4 years in Southern California for school, 4 years back in Boulder, 4 years in Boston, and then we've been up in the mountains now for about 5 or 6 years.
A good choice. It's a good choice for sure. Now, I kind of want to go back to those early days when you're growing up as a kid. I imagine you don't know about the world of sales, the world of go to market, coaching businesses, things of that nature. So, what does Jordan Benjamin want to do as a 10, 15-year old?
Probably 10 was professional baseball player. Thought that was going to be the path. Of course, it was that easy. Played a lot of baseball my whole life, played some other sports, but that's what I played 4 years of in high school, things of this sort. That's what took me to Southern California, mainly to go to Southern California because it was a D3 school. I knew I wasn't really going to even play, let alone go professional at that point, but I got some money for school, so that helped. But for me, life was like, yeah, how do I enjoy the outdoors? How do I maybe I wanted to be president, which I've totally thought that would be a horrible job that I have no interest in anymore. But those were a couple of the early thoughts for me floating around my head is where I was thinking about going with my life.
You still have a couple weeks, I think, to get on the ballot. We're
Yeah,
recording this just before the presidential interview. So maybe write in Jordan if you're undecided.
there we go.
Maybe you could, yeah, there you go. You could take us through your origin story then in the world of go to market. I'm looking at your LinkedIn right now. I see kind of some internships in the area, and then I see the classic kind of SDR out of college role. Can you take us through the first time that you're in the world of going to market?
Yeah, I mean, I went to school for business, international business focus. Really had no idea what I wanted to do. Thought maybe I wanted to be a psychologist or therapist, and initially thought I wanted to be a lawyer. Worked inside of a couple law firms and realized like, oh, that's definitely not it for me. Had some lawyers in the family, but decided that's not my path. Decided to focus on business because I said, well, every company's got to figure out how to run itself, so I should be able to find some path in there. Somebody told me, hey, like maybe you should check out sales. Maybe you should check out this company. There was a startup in Boulder called Trada that was super interesting, had backing from like Google Ventures and some other pretty big names in the space. And they were a pay-per-click company. So I was like, wow, they've got backing from Google and they work in the PPC space. Like, you should check it out. They weren't ready to hire me yet. They were like, yeah, we're not taking folks on just yet. They were probably 50 employees at the time, and they weren't ready to take on somebody with zero formal sales experience. Although even in internships, I realized in hindsight, I did have some sales experience. So hopped over to the wonderful world of selling yoga pants at Lululemon, which actually was a pretty profound experience when I reflected on it 5, 6 years down the road, because working on the floor, on the sales floor at Lululemon, your job title is educator. You're not sales associate. You're not anything like that. It was like, hey, you've got to learn everything you can about what we sell, about our competition, and educate folks on what will be best for them based upon their needs. So was at Lululemon, did great, had a fun time, really loved that culture. They actually instilled some really awesome principles in me that have lasted a long time. But finally got the call, hey, we're ready to build the SDR team out further, take on folks with more experience. So went and joined Trada, got into my first real startup where I got paid. I worked in a few other startups where I did not get paid for a while as intern and things like that, but got in, hit the ground running, pounding the phone, 100 dials a day, et cetera, and working in marketing strategy, working in how do you talk about growth strategy as a whole. And that's really kind of what got me excited to stay in that space. When that company eventually folded, they laid off about 90% of the workforce. And I decided, all right, time to go find a new job. Spent about 3 months on the job hunt, found a new job doing influencer marketing. And a closer role, I grew from BDR to sales to team lead, things like that in Trada at that first company. And then went to a closing role at another startup. that was still probably 70 employees, pretty small, in Boulder, doing influencer marketing. Was there for about 3 months selling to big corporate brands, like selling into enterprise, meeting with Airbnb, Kendall Jackson Wines, was loving life. It was super exciting. I was staying in nice hotels in San Francisco, covering the West Coast. 90 days in, they have a big company meeting. Hey, we're going to reduction in force here. We're going to have to let go 35, 40% of the company. Laid me off. Second time in 6 months. I had done some strategic partnership work with some folks at HubSpot prior. My girlfriend at the time was moving to Boston for grad school, and it was like, hey, I think it might be time to move to Boston. So literally, the CEO of that second company that I got laid off from reached, it was when we're talking, when he's going through the whole like, hey, sorry, we're going to have to let you go. He's like, I know you're going to do great things everywhere. And I try to be very humble in most of what I do. But sitting there was a switch that flipped for me a little bit where he was like, I know you're going to do really great things where you go next. And I sat there and I was like, I know I am. Before I left the office, got on Facebook Messenger to the guy that I knew from HubSpot, sent him a message, said, hey, I think might be moving to Boston. Like, you guys hiring? Absolutely, yes. Found my way to HubSpot. We were probably 600 or 700 people at the time.
Interesting.
Pre-IPO. Joined in a channel sales role, so working with our fledgling partner program at the time, seeing how can you really get leverage from external folks to help grow your sales team without having to hire a sales team, which worked incredibly well. It was one of the magical pieces of the HubSpot growth story to get a lot of leverage, and spent about 9 years there working with our partners, growing the partner program, and really doing a lot of other things on the side. To shorten the story a little bit, taught yoga, taught mindfulness meditation, and built some internal training programs as well on how do you perform better beyond just the sales skills, which have really kind of led to my path now. So that was a really long story, but hopefully we get a nice snippet out of it.
No, it's a great story. Now, I want to go back to your Trada and Tap influence days. You're laid off twice in 6 months. You're making 100 dials a day at the start of it. That type of experience might lend some people to say, I do not like this. I do not like sales. But you continue down the path and look for more punishment, if you will, through HubSpot. Are you okay with this as a career path? What is happening in your head that's saying like, no, I think this is still the way to go?
I would be crazy if I didn't say money was part of it. My dad was a executive director of a nonprofit for 30 plus years. And I think in like my second or third year of sales, he was like, holy cow, you made more money than I did. And I've got a master's degree and all these things. So one, there was definitely this whole like, wow, there's a path to more money than I ever really thought was like, than I really thought I was going to make. And two, what I think really changed sales for me a lot was seeing it as a profession, seeing it as I'm not just a sales guy or gal, but like I'm a sales professional here and I can master a lot of these skills. And to me, the coolest part of sales is the best sales skills are also a lot of the best life skills that are still an absolute work in progress for me. Active listening, asking better questions, understanding the root psychology of what drives humans to take action are all things that align really tightly to sales and ultimately life as well. And so I thought once I was done with college, I was going to have all the knowledge I needed to go out and build a successful life. But really through my sales career, I realized that the learning never stops. And if I can learn a lot of these fundamental human tendencies and psychology, I can actually start to build and architect a much better life for myself than I'd ever thought possible based upon all the programming and other stuff that had been kind of just innately forced into me without my decision or my choice on it at all.
That's interesting. So you saw early on that there was practical application to make yourself a better person throughout the process. And I think your story kind of has that in a couple ways throughout your arc, because you're obviously then becoming successful at HubSpot, but you're still making time to become a yoga practitioner, to become a yoga instructor, to lead, sounds like mindfulness and meditation. Take me through those elements of the side quest, if you will, and how they interplayed with your professional career. What was it about them that you made time to keep them up?
Yeah. So on the like mindfulness front, one of the sessions that I actually ran at GTM where we got a chance to get together was called Mental Gym. And so for me, I'd always been an athlete, always thought about, working out, exercising my body. But I got into meditation, stumbled into it my freshman year of college. Same thing with yoga. had friends that were like, hey, you should check this out. You might like this. And started to notice these experiences that, again, like school never taught me or never gave me this understanding was there. And so those had both been pretty big parts of my life for a long time before I even got into the professional world. And once I started to get into the stress of sales, of trying to earn a paycheck, of having to like put in the grind to actually get a reasonable paycheck, because my base salary was pretty measly at the time, was really where I found those skills helped me train my brain to manage stress more effectively, to handle objections better, to handle failure and setback more effectively. And really what it became for me was, how do I give this back to others? Because I think that's one of the best ways to sustain happiness, to sustain performance, is when you can feel like you're actually contributing and giving back to other people. And so for me, I had options to like go teach yoga for money, but instead I taught for free inside of HubSpot and offered it to so many folks that were like, oh, I would never go to a studio or pay money to do this is way too intimidating. But the fact that like, one, I know you, Jordan, or two, it's in the office and it's free, made it super accessible for folks that maybe would never go to it. And so I would run yoga sessions, meditation sessions, and then these sessions around kind of peak performance more so that were about, how do we set goals or how do we go beyond? And so for me, a lot of it was just using these skills that I was investing in for myself to grow and build my own tool set to build my life intentionally, opposed to just kind of running on that hamster wheel that most of us are on. And honestly, the other part of it is I've seen so many folks struggle with depression, anxiety, suicide, those other areas that have the money, the person that loves them, all those other areas in life that you think make joy and happiness, but yet it still wasn't there for so many folks. So for me, it was about contributing and giving back to others, was a lot of it.
I love that. And obviously it's working because you're kind of moving up the ranks pretty quickly at HubSpot and finding success and through your sales role. And it looked like you were building out a lot of the partner sales motion while you're there. And a big part of that ecosystem's growth. And it's a 9-year stint at HubSpot. Can you take me through kind of just the evolution of like where things were when you started and what the story was like for you when you left?
Yeah. So I sat in essentially the same role the whole time, which is also why I got into all these other kind of extracurricular things to really keep myself engaged and entertained. But for me, when we started out, the partner program was still probably in its first 2 years or so when I got there. And so we were still really startup-y, maybe moving towards that scale up motion, but where we were still trying to figure out, how do we manage lead routing and rotation? How do we manage ownership? How do we handle compensation between our direct and partner organizations? Like how do we collaborate together? And there was a tons of friction because, for you, what you might like to nerd out on is like, I was able to work any size account in any region or geography on the partner team, where our, internal direct sales org was focused on, small business, medium size corporate enterprise based upon geo and some other things like that. And so it was a lot of the Wild West. Initially, we had one role that was signing up full both partner and then managing them, really trying to kind of build out your annuity book of business is what we talked about at the start, to where we then segmented those roles to we'd have somebody signing up new partners. And, I moved into the role where we would just solely work with those partners once they were already on board. And then, we continued to evolve that in a few different ways to really think about how do we get the most leverage from these partners, where by the time we left, they were actually starting to get rid of the role that I sat in for a long time to really just funnel it directly into the direct side of the business, where partners had quite a bit less like direct support associated to them. And they would just kind of liaise with their internal person, their channel account manager or their partner development manager now. And so that's kind of also where the timing was nice for me to leave. And, as I just saw the shift, because for me, I thought of my role as helping coach business owners to grow a better business. Again, having that business background, things of the sort. Most of these marketing agencies that we were working with had no business acumen. Maybe they were somebody that had built websites. And they're like, yeah, I built 1 or 2 websites for a friend. And then a few more friends asked me to help them out. So now all of a sudden I had to hire somebody. And they had no clue, how do they hire and fire? How do they plan for their talent? How do they put folks in the right seats on the bus? How do they price and package? How do they sell? And so that was really kind of how I saw the role. And as it evolved, it really became much more of a, how do you get these folks to sell more HubSpot role? Because HubSpot was big enough, we already had enough demand, and some of those other things had really shifted quite a bit.
That's interesting. So you've now gone from, startup land where you're selling to large scale partnership sales and operations for a big company. You're doing all of these things on the side to not only help yourself, but help the people that you work with. At some point, I'm assuming that it kind of manifests as MyCoreOS. Maybe you can tell the origin story of the business. And then I want to get into, I noticed a couple of kind of products on your website that I want to understand how each of them work.
Totally. So for me, it really kind of came about when I was running these sessions internally, had built some content out. I'd spoken at HubSpot's flagship conference, Inbound, a couple of times on different topics. I think the first one was professional athletes meditate, why sales professionals should too. Another one was, how leaders can build empathy to lead more effectively, and some of those other skills were some of the talks that I'd run. And so started talking to some folks that were like, hey, it'd be awesome to have you come into, my company. Would love to have you talk to us, talk to our team about how they can perform better. What are these, tools they can add to their tool belt? I'm a big proponent of things like meditation. Yeah, I know it's incredibly beneficial if you do it every day, but there are a lot of different forms. There are a lot of different ways that folks can take that. So I really focused on how could I arm folks with different tools to have in their tool belt at different times to say, oh, I'm really stressed. Cool. I can focus on breathing. I'm really thinking about goal setting and planning right now. How can I, focus on some sort of visualization to see what it is that I really want? And so that was really kind of what started that opportunity. And then I had a few friends that were leading sales organizations, leading go-to-market teams saying, hey, would you come speak at our sales kickoff? Would you come, work one-on-one with me? And some of those other areas that really kind of set that foundation to say, all right, there's probably some sort of a business here that has really turned into MyCoreOS, essentially talking about how do we intentionally build our own personal operating system, because we're always updating our phone or our computer whenever it pushes us to. But each of us is either consciously or not updating how we operate and how we show up in the world every single day with every action that we take. But most of us are doing this unconsciously with no direction or intention that leads to stress, depression, anxiety, all those other things that really seem like we're in a better place and don't need to have chasing us around in the world that we're in, at least, especially in the tech world and, in the United States, where we've got so many of the foundational things that can create happiness and joy in life.
That makes a lot of sense. I kind of, I understand how it becomes, MyCoreOS. And so you have these great tools. You've done a lot of the work in preparing presentations. You have presumably kind of curriculum and structure. It sounds like you knew a few people who maybe were going to become your first clients. Did you have any apprehension about, well, I need to make this a full-fledged business? I've got to really turn things on here. Any nervousness there, or were those first clients enough to say, I can get this over the hump and get it rolling?
Tons of nervousness, tons of apprehension. One of the things that I work with a lot of clients on is imposter syndrome. And I think that the fallacy that most of us have is that imposter syndrome goes away once you hit the, whatever mark it is. And for me, even I go and talk to other friends where I'm like, oh, I'm afraid, I'm nervous about this. I think I did 6 president's clubs at HubSpot over 9 years, but really only being eligible 7 or 8 of those years. And I still go back to some friends and had a conversation with a good friend a little while ago on my personal board of directors, who I was like, man, maybe I just wasn't really that good. Maybe the president's clubs were all a fluke. And he was like, do you know how many people did not keep their job during that time? Do you know how many people did not have success? And so that apprehension, that nervousness is, I think, going to be there for almost anybody. But the real place of courage is when you still act in the face of fear. When you have that apprehension, when you have that nervousness and you say, I don't know the answers, but I know I can figure it out. I know I can go in there and put in the effort. As goofy as it is, I did a Peloton ride this morning, and Kendall Toole is like, they may knock you down, but they're never going to knock you out. And the Peloton instructors are really good at dropping some of that motivation, where I think it's that courage is saying, yeah, I've got apprehension, I've got nervousness, I may fall on my face, but that's how we learn to walk. we picked ourselves back up again and again and again. And yet I think a lot of us forget that as we become adults, and we expect everything to always be easy. And we expect the answers to be handed to us like they were in school. Again, school didn't really give us the tools to build a great life. It gave us a lot of tools to remember things.
So your business encompasses a few different things. You've got executive workshop, you've got peak performance selling, you got one-on-one coaching. I want to understand first, how does the one-on-one coaching work?
Yeah. So typically what we'll do is I've got a bunch of online curriculum that I'll share with folks, dependent upon, again, what tool do they need at that time. So one-on-one coaching is really bespoke, really working to understand where someone is at in their career, in their life journey, and how do we help show up for them? How do we help them feel seen and respected, heard? A lot of folks think that their direct manager or director or whatever the person above them is the one that's going to be their mentor and their coach and help them develop. And yeah, there's an extent of that, but we typically find those folks have one, bias towards solving for themselves and their own job. And two, they usually don't have enough time to actually really dedicate to working with somebody. And so for me, I thought early on, like, oh, great, my manager's going to take me under their wing and they're going to like tell me everything I need to know to, again, build my awesome life. And they helped me with some things. I had a couple really great managers. I had a couple not so great managers, and I had some really bad managers too along the way. And you can actually learn a lot from the folks that give you bad examples. So even though I didn't really realize that in the first startup, it took me a while to realize like, oh, we're doing everything wrong. I'm not learning anything. And that was the exact learning. And so the one-on-one coaching is really about saying like, how do we show up and understand where somebody is at? Where are they trying to go? And just as much as I think of sales as you're like a Sherpa guiding your prospect to the most effective outcome and decision for themselves, I find it super similarly in coaching. It's about understanding, okay, great. Somebody's thinking about going towards that next promotional level. They're trying to think about how do they manage their stress more effectively in their work and life, because a lot of folks talk about work-life balance, and really it's kind of a fallacy because we only have one life. We're not, a work person and a different person here and there. We've got different parts of our personality, but really what I work with folks on is how do we create stories? How do we find empowerment and alignment and harmony between our work and our life and all these other parts that we show up for? So that's really where we work one-on-one. Online content, online tools, different recorded lessons come up. And then it's usually Zoom calls where we're talking maybe weekly. I've got some text messages coming through right now from a client asking some questions for where they're at. So it really kind of comes up in a few different forms as a whole.
I love that. I mean, I think we're seeing that you're on the cutting edge of something. I remember watching a documentary about Lewis Hamilton and some of the Formula One drivers, right? And they, of course, all have not only a racing coach, but someone who's taking them through what are you trying to do? How is your mental game related to this? So bringing that to our world, I think, is an exciting thing. And you also are doing things related to selling workshops and executive workshops. Can you talk about some of the other work that you're doing?
Yeah, so it's really taken a whole bunch of different forms. Like some folks, they've had executive offsites where they say, hey, great, our leadership team's up here. We'd like to have some different sessions to moderate and drive them. So it's not just, hey, we're going to only sit here and talk about our planning, but we're also going to figure out how do we connect as a team? How do we get mutually shared language so we can all work together? How do we, again, build these tools to understand when we're all showing up at our best? Because our energy works in rhythms, whether it's you look at a circadian rhythm, but folks really thinking about like, how do we manage our energy more effectively than our time? Because managing time is really important, but if our energy is low for these different times, it may not work well. So I've run a few different workshops in that space. And then also, getting up and presenting in for like SKOs or coming in to do like a day-long corporate workshop, or even I'll show up. I just did something with a sales leader and his team, about 20, 25 folks talking about, moving into Q4, what can you control? What can you focus on? How do we give ourselves a score to actually quantify where we're at? So we have something that's beyond good, fine, okay, great. And we can actually start measuring like what's our probability and likelihood of success based upon what's in our control today. So really working across all these different tools that I've taken from whether it's, Seth Godin. I spent a long time with him and his Alt MBA program, which unfortunately he just canceled, but I took that for myself a bunch of years ago, coached it a few times and got a chance to lead and learn a lot from Seth. All sorts of these different folks in the personal development space too, and really taking this toolbox to say, okay, great. What do these different organizations need? And a lot of the time I find in sales, sellers love to make excuses. They love to point the finger at the bad territory planning, the bad marketing leads, the whatever else it could be. And turns out it is what it is. And now you've got to figure out how do you make the best of it. And I fell into those struggles a lot of my own. So that's where I get a chance to use some of these things that I really struggled with to help others and help other teams say, how do we elevate our performance? How do we set bigger goals? How do we get more purpose behind our goals that really pushes us to perform better? And how do we do that in a way that we can sustain it over the long haul? Because I've seen so many folks that I've worked with and spent time around that, great, hey, I was number one. I was the number one in the company for the year. Now what? Now I'm burnt out. I'm fried. I don't really have a drive to do that again. I don't care. And so really working with folks to see how do we find deeper meaning and purpose that'll drive them for much longer? And how do we build in habits and routines that ultimately set you on this path for an incredible life that goes beyond just, 1 month, 1 quarter, 1 year.
So you're doing all this work, you're running your own business, you've got kind of multiple irons in the fire, and your head is down at that part of it. But what are you still, most curious about, where you do get a chance to peek up and you say, okay, I'm learning about new things that I can either apply to my business, or maybe it's about the tech ecosystem. I'm wondering where you're thinking about for the future, like what's most on your mind related to that.
I love reading. I love TED Talks. I just love nerding out. Again, I come back to this thought that learning really just gets started once you get done with school, whatever age or stage that is that you go to. And so for me, as I think about the future, I'm looking a lot into neuroscience and how that is showing up, and actually using like functional MRI imaging to see how the brain is changing when you do different things. I'm looking a lot into marketing, as much as I spent my time in sales, and I think sales and marketing having this whole division has set both folks up for kind of a bad position to be in, because you're both there to drive growth for an organization. I'm looking a lot into, okay, how do I market myself better and more effectively? How do I leverage LinkedIn and build better trainings? How do I build more effective training on online platforms, on like Kajabi's and some of those other areas to start to find some scale? Although I'm really not focused on much scale, where I really want to focus on highest quality possible and really deep work with folks that I'm spending time with. And so for me, it's about finding those systems and processes now that can make it easier for me to grow in a very managed and controlled way.
That makes sense. And so I'm realizing we're out of time. If you can think back to a baseball player, Jordan, perhaps he's a little sad that he's not going to be able to make the big leagues, and he's kind of starting out as an SDR, and then he's about to get laid off twice in a 6-month period. I'm curious what advice you would give to yourself, knowing what you know now.
I think for me, that the biggest thing that I learned along that time, or advice that I'd give myself, is you're going to learn so much more from failure than you will from doing the right thing. And it's totally okay to fail as long as you pick yourself back up and learn something along the way. It took me quite a few years to adopt the win or learn mentality opposed to win or lose. And I think for sellers especially, win or learn is the only way you're going to survive, because you're going to take more losses. I think that's where baseball really helped me as a seller. Good ball player, you get a hit 3 or 4 times out of 10, you end up in the Hall of Fame. Okay, great. That means you're still failing 6 or 7 times out of 10. So for me, it's that win or lose mentality I think is really helpful. And it's just trying new things, being okay, getting uncomfortable.
That's a hopeful note to end on. I love the positive vibes coming out of this. And if you're interested in learning more about Jordan's business, we'll put the link to MyCoreOS in the show notes and all that good stuff. But Jordan, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate the conversation, and look forward to staying connected.
Looking forward to it. Have a great one, Kevin.